This is the story of a young man who turned chaos into compassion, saving the life of the very person who mistreated him. Meet Rick Watson, a 26-year-old medical student living a quiet, focused life. It's a Saturday afternoon, and Rick is walking home after a quick lunch, lost in thought about his latest medical project. But what seemed like an ordinary day quickly turned into an extraordinary encounter that would change his life forever. As Rick walked down the street, he had no idea that the next few minutes would thrust him into an intense and life-changing situation. A confrontation with a stranger would soon escalate into something much bigger, and by the end, Rick would face a decision that could define who he was as a person. So, what would you do if you were in his shoes? Would you act with compassion, even when the world around you seems chaotic? Let's dive into Rick's story and find out. Rick Watson was the type of person who preferred peace over chaos. At 26 years old, he was a focused medical student, dedicated to his studies and committed to supporting his family. His life revolved around books, exams, and quiet moments at home. It wasn't that he didn't enjoy the world around him, it was just that he was content with the calm routine he had built. On this particular Saturday afternoon, Rick was walking through the peaceful streets of Castroville, a small neighborhood nestled in Southern California. The sun was shining, the air was warm, and it seemed like just another normal day. Little did he know, this tranquil moment would soon be shattered by an encounter that would throw him into a situation far from ordinary. As Rick made his way down the sidewalk, lost in thought about his latest medical project, a man suddenly brushed past him, not saying a word. The stranger was a little older than Rick, with wild hair and a crazed look in his eyes. Before Rick could even register what had happened, the man turned around sharply, blocking his path. With a loud and angry voice, the man barked at Rick. "You think you can just walk around like you own the place?" Rick was taken aback, not sure what to make of this sudden aggression. He tried to step around the man, but the man shoved him in the chest, pushing him back hard. The tension in the air rose immediately. Rick, confused and a bit unsettled, looked at the stranger and said, "Hey, what's your problem? I didn't do anything to you." But instead of backing off, the man stepped forward again, shoving Rick with even more force. This wasn't just an angry exchange. It felt unhinged, as if the man was ready to snap at any moment. The situation quickly escalated when the stranger swung a wild punch at Rick, hitting him in the shoulder. The crowd that had begun to gather gasped, and Rick, instinctively, pushed back in defense. A fight had erupted on the sidewalk, the crowd watching, unsure of what to do. Each shove, punch, and struggle intensified the situation. As Rick realized that this wasn't just a random fight, it was something far more dangerous, and he had to figure out how to defuse it quickly. Just as the fight between Rick and the stranger seemed to spiral out of control, the sound of a commanding voice cut through the chaos. "Break it up!" Officer Frank Lawson, a seasoned cop, rushed onto the scene, pushing through the crowd that had formed around the fight. Rick thought, finally, someone who would help him, but instead of stepping in to de-escalate the situation, Officer Lawson walked directly up to Rick and shoved him roughly, saying, "I said, break it up." Rick, still in shock from the unexpected confrontation, tried to explain himself. "Officer, I didn't start this. He attacked me for no reason." But Officer Lawson wasn't interested in listening. His focus was solely on Rick, grabbing his arm and twisting it behind his back, preparing to cuff him. The injustice of the moment hit Rick hard, but there was no time to argue. He realized that the officer wasn't going to hear him out. He was only concerned with taking control. But then, just as quickly as the officer had intervened, something unexpected happened. Officer Lawson suddenly staggered, his face drained of color, and he collapsed to the ground, dropping his handcuffs with a loud clink. The crowd gasped in shock. Rick froze, his heart pounding in his chest, unsure of what was happening. For a brief moment, It seemed like the world had stopped moving. The officer, who had just moments ago been ready to arrest Rick, was now lying motionless on the ground. As the silence lingered, Rick's medical training kicked in. He quickly knelt beside the officer, checking for a pulse. His fingers pressed into Lawson's wrist, and he felt the faint, irregular beat of a heart. It didn't take long for Rick to realize what was happening. The officer was having a heart attack. Despite everything that had just happened, Rick didn't hesitate. He knew exactly what needed to be done. Rick had been trained in CPR during his medical studies, and this was his moment to act. Without a second thought, he began chest compressions, pushing down firmly on the officer's chest. His mind focused entirely on saving the man's life. It didn't matter that this was the same officer who had treated him unfairly moments before. In this moment, Rick knew that saving a life was the right thing to do. The crowd, still in shock, watched as Rick worked quickly, determined not to let the officer slip away. Rick's calm and determined demeanor took over as he applied CPR, his hands steady despite the shock and confusion that surrounded him. With each chest compression, he counted in his head, blocking out the noise and focusing solely on the officer's life hanging in the balance. The crowd stood frozen, unsure of what to do or how to react to the strange turn of events. Some whispered, others fidgeted, but all eyes were on Rick as he worked relentlessly to revive Officer Lawson. It wasn't until the officer let out a sudden, ragged cough that the tension in the air broke. Slowly, the officer's eyes fluttered open, his breathing ragged but steady. Rick, relieved but focused, reassured him, "You're going to be okay, officer. You just need medical attention now." The crowd, who had watched in disbelief, slowly began to realize what had just happened. Rick had saved the officer's life. The applause started quietly at first, hesitant, but soon grew louder as the enormity of the moment sank in. Rick, though grateful, remained humble, simply stepping back as the officer regained his strength. The crowd's clapping was a reminder of the unexpected transformation that had just taken place, a moment of compassion in the midst of chaos. As the sound of sirens filled the air, the ambulance pulled up, and paramedics rushed to Officer Lawson's side. Rick stepped back, letting them take over, knowing the officer was in good hands now. The crowd slowly began to disperse, but the weight of what had just happened lingered in the air. Officer Lawson, still pale and visibly shaken, looked up at Rick as the medics assessed him. There was no anger in his eyes now, only gratitude and something deeper, a realization of how wrong he had been. Taking a deep breath, he spoke, his voice hoarse but sincere. "I owe you my life," he said, struggling to find the right words. "I'm sorry for how I treated you earlier. I was wrong." Rick looked at him for a moment, then simply nodded. He wasn't seeking recognition, nor did he want an apology. He had done what he knew was right, and that was enough. "You don't have to say anything," Rick replied quietly. "I just did what I had to do." His words hung in the air, a simple but powerful reminder that kindness wasn't about who deserved it. It was about doing what was right, no matter the circumstances. As the paramedics helped Officer Lawson onto the stretcher, Rick turned and walked away, his mind still processing everything that had happened. He didn't need praise or applause. He only hoped that this moment had left a lasting impact, not just on the officer, but on everyone who had witnessed it. Because in the end, it wasn't about a fight, or an arrest, or even saving a life. It was about proving that compassion could rise above conflict, and that sometimes the best way to change the world was simply by choosing to do good. A few days after the incident, Rick received an unexpected letter in the mail. It was from the police department. He hesitated for a moment before opening it, unsure of what to expect. As his eyes scanned the words on the page, he felt a mix of surprise and humility. The letter formally acknowledged his selfless act, recognizing the courage and compassion he had shown in saving Officer Lawson's life. But that wasn't all. As a token of appreciation, the department was offering Rick an all-expenses-paid scholarship to attend an advanced medical conference in Chicago, an opportunity that could greatly benefit his future career. Rick sat there for a moment, processing everything. He had never expected anything in return for what he had done. He hadn't acted for recognition, reward, or even an apology. He had simply done what he knew was right. Yet this gesture showed him something important. Doing the right thing, even in the hardest of moments, could leave a lasting impact on others. It wasn't just about saving a life that day. It was about changing perspectives, breaking barriers, and proving that kindness could exist even in the most unexpected places. As he folded the letter, Rick realized that this experience had changed him too. It reaffirmed what he had always believed: compassion would always matter, no matter the circumstances. And in the end, that was what truly made a difference. As Rick reached the end of the letter, he noticed an additional note tucked inside, handwritten, not from the department, but from Officer Lawson himself. The words were simple, but their weight was undeniable. "Rick, I was wrong. You taught me more in those few minutes than I learned in all my years on the force. I will never forget what you did for me. Thank you." Rick read the note twice, then a third time, letting the words sink in. It wasn't just an apology, it was an acknowledgement of growth, of change. The same officer who had treated him unfairly now understood the gravity of his actions. It wasn't just about gratitude. It was about realizing that justice wasn't just about power, but about fairness and humanity. For Rick, this experience had been more than just an unexpected test of his medical skills. It had been a lesson in resilience, in compassion, and in the power of doing what's right even when it's difficult. He had stepped in to save a life without hesitation, never expecting anything in return. Yet, in the end, it wasn't just the officer's life that had changed. Rick had changed too. He had witnessed firsthand that kindness, even in the face of injustice, could spark transformation. And perhaps that was the most powerful outcome of all. Sometimes, the most unexpected encounters teach us the most important lessons about forgiveness, compassion, and the power of doing the right thing, even when it's not easy. Rick didn't just save a life that day. He proved that kindness has the power to change hearts. Now we ask you, when faced with a moment of chaos, will you respond with compassion? Let us know in the comments below. And if this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more heartfelt stories. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.